I was sitting on a bench at the Mazatlán bus station with my suitcase at my feet and my debit card in my hand. The ATM screen said insufficient funds. I tried again, same message. I had $80 cash left and a one-way bus ticket to Mexico City that I couldn't afford to use because I didn't have money for food or a place to stay when I got there. The station smelled like diesel and fried food. Families were buying tickets, couples were holding hands, and I was 58 years old, trying to figure out how I'd gone from owning 3 beachfront condos to sleeping on a bus station bench in less than 4 years. 4 years earlier, I was standing in my kitchen in Denver, looking at a spreadsheet on my laptop. I'd just finalized my divorce. 23 years of marriage ended. The house sold for enough to give me a fresh start. After the lawyers and the settlement, I had $340,000. Not a fortune, but enough to retire comfortably if I was smart about it. The problem was, Denver wasn't cheap anymore. My rent was eating into my savings every month. I was 54, tired of mountain winters, tired of working warehouse jobs just to stay afloat. I started researching retirement destinations. Panama kept coming up, Costa Rica, Portugal. Then I found Mazatlán. The math was simple. A beachfront condo in Denver cost $700,000 minimum. In Mazatlán, I could buy the same thing for $180,000. The cost of living was a third of what I was paying in Colorado. And the real opportunity was Airbnb. I'd been following the digital nomad trend for years. Americans were flooding into Mexico, looking for cheap beachfront rentals. If I bought 3 condos, rented them out short term, I could easily make $4,000 to $5,000 a month, maybe more during high season. The plan felt bulletproof. I flew down to Mazatlán in March to look at properties. The moment I stepped off the plane, I felt something shift. The heat, the ocean breeze, the slower pace. This was exactly what I needed. I spent a week touring condos with different real estate agents. Most of them were overpriced or in bad locations. Then I found the one, a 2-bedroom unit in Zona Dorada, 5th floor, ocean view, walk to the beach. The building was older but well maintained. Good security. The asking price was $200,000. I offered $170. They countered at $185. I came back at $180. Deal. The transaction took 6 weeks. I hired a lawyer to handle the fideicomiso, the trust structure foreigners need to own property in Mexico near the coast. It cost me $4,000 in legal fees, but everything checked out. The title was clean. The trust was legitimate. In May, I wired the money and got the keys. I furnished the place with IKEA basics, bought some beach art from local vendors, and listed it on Airbnb. Within 2 weeks, I had my first booking. A couple from San Diego, staying for 10 days. They left a 5-star review. I felt like I'd cracked the code. The first 6 months were everything I'd hoped for. I was living in my condo, managing bookings myself, meeting guests when they arrived. The rental income was covering my expenses and then some. I was making around $2,000 a month after fees and cleaning. I spent my mornings on the beach, my afternoons handling turnovers, my evenings eating fresh seafood at restaurants where a full meal cost $12. I was healthier, happier, more relaxed than I'd been in years. I started thinking about scaling up. That's when I met Sophia. She worked at a real estate office on Avenida del Mar. I'd gone in to ask about buying a second property. She was 29, spoke perfect English, had this easy confidence that made you feel like you'd known her for years. We talked about the market, about my Airbnb, about her family in Culiacan. She said she had a cousin who did property management for foreign investors. I told her I was managing everything myself for now, but I'd keep it in mind. She smiled and said, "Call me if you need anything." She wrote her number on the back of her business card. I didn't call her about business. I called her 2 days later and asked if she wanted to get dinner. She said yes. We went to a seafood place near the Malecon. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about growing up in Sinaloa, about studying tourism management in Guadalajara, about moving to Mazatlán because she loved the ocean. I told her about my divorce, about Denver, about taking a chance on this new life. She didn't ask about money. She didn't ask about my plans. She just listened. It felt real. We started seeing each other regularly, dinners, walks on the beach, weekend trips to nearby towns. She introduced me to her friends. I met her younger brother who worked construction. Everything felt natural. I wasn't naive enough to think this was some grand romance. I was 54, she was 29, but we enjoyed each other's company, and that was enough. After 2 months, she started staying over a few nights a week. She'd help me with turnovers between guests, translating maintenance requests, recommending local cleaners. It felt like a partnership. One night over wine, she asked me about my long-term plan. I told her I wanted to buy 2 more condos, build a small portfolio, maybe hire someone to manage everything so I could travel more. She said her cousin Roberto did exactly that. Managed properties for foreign owners, handled bookings, maintenance, guest issues, everything. He took 15% of gross revenue, industry standard. She could introduce us if I was interested. I said maybe. I wanted to see how the second property purchase went first. I found the second condo in October. It was in a newer building, closer to the marina, same size as my first place, better finishes. Asking price 200,000. I negotiated down to 185. I had enough cash left for the purchase and closing costs, but it would leave me thin. I decided to finance part of it through a Mexican bank. It took forever to get approved as a foreigner, but eventually I got a mortgage for 90,000 at 8% interest. I put down 95,000 cash. After legal fees and furniture, I was into it for about 110,000 total. I listed it on Airbnb immediately. The bookings came in slower than the first property. The location wasn't as good. But by December, I was getting consistent reservations. Combined with my first condo, I was making around 4,000 a month. I was living off 2,000, banking 2,000. It felt sustainable, but managing 2 properties was becoming a headache. Double the turnovers, double the guest messages, double the maintenance calls. When Sophia mentioned Roberto again, I was more open to it. Roberto seemed professional. Mid-30s, drove a nice truck, had a portfolio of properties he managed for other American and Canadian owners. He showed me his booking calendars, his revenue reports. Everything looked legitimate. He proposed the same deal, 15% of gross. He'd handle everything: bookings, guest communication, cleaning, maintenance, emergencies. I'd just collect deposits every month. I asked Sophia if she trusted him. She said he's family. He's been doing this for 5 years. I signed a management agreement. For the first 3 months, everything was fine. Roberto sent me monthly statements. The revenue matched what I was expecting. He was even getting higher nightly rates than I had been charging. He said he'd optimized the listings, improved the photos, adjusted pricing based on demand. I felt like I'd made the right decision. I started looking at a third property. Sophia found one for me. A smaller unit, 1 bedroom, but right on the beach. Listed at 150. We negotiated down to 135. I was out of cash, so I took out a second mortgage on my first condo. Got 60,000. Used that plus some credit card advances to close the deal. That's when the first red flag appeared. The third property was supposed to go live on Airbnb in January. Roberto said he was handling it, but when I checked the listing in February, it still wasn't active. I called him. He said there were permit issues. The building required a tourism license that was taking longer than expected. He was working on it. Don't worry. I asked Sophia if that was normal. She said yes. Mexican bureaucracy is slow. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. March came. The listing still wasn't live. I started checking the revenue reports more carefully. Something felt off. The occupancy rates Roberto was reporting for my first two condos seemed high, but the revenue seemed low for those rates. I asked for access to the Airbnb dashboards. He said his company policy was to maintain control of listings to prevent confusion. Red flag number 2. I pushed harder. He finally gave me view-only access. The numbers didn't match his reports. Not even close. I confronted him. He had excuses. Currency conversion errors. Cleaning costs he'd forgotten to list. Maintenance expenses. None of it added up. I told him I was terminating the agreement. He said fine, but when I logged into my Airbnb accounts, I discovered he'd changed all the passwords. He'd registered the listings under his business email. I didn't have control of my own properties anymore. I went to a lawyer. The lawyer looked at my management agreement and shook his head. You gave him power of attorney for the listings. Getting control back will take months, maybe longer. I went to Sophia. I needed her to talk to Roberto, to make this right. She didn't answer her phone for 3 days. When she finally called back, she said Roberto told her a different story. He said I owed him money for expenses he'd covered. She said maybe there was a misunderstanding. That's when I realized she'd been part of it from the beginning. The cousin, the introduction, the encouragement to buy more properties. She'd been setting me up the whole time, and I'd been too lonely and too eager to see it. I hired a different lawyer. He said I could sue, but the process would take a year minimum. The courts in Sinaloa were backed up. Even if I won, collecting would be another battle. Meanwhile, I had no rental income. I had 3 properties I couldn't access, 2 mortgages I couldn't pay, and credit card debt piling up from the 3rd purchase. My savings were gone. I was living off credit cards, burning through my remaining cash trying to keep up with mortgage payments. Then Hurricane Norma hit. September, Category 1, but strong enough to do damage. The storm surge flooded the ground floors of both my condo buildings. My units were higher up, but the buildings lost power for a week. Water damage in common areas. Structural inspections required before guests could return. My insurance didn't cover hurricane damage. I'd gone with the cheapest policy to save money. The HOA assessed special fees to cover repairs. $5,000 per unit for my first 2 condos. I didn't have it. I stopped answering my phone, stopped checking email. I was living in my 3rd condo, the one that had never generated a single dollar of income. The HOA in that building started sending notices. Unpaid fees, threats of liens. I tried to sell, listed all 3 properties with a desperate agent who promised quick sales. No offers. The market had shifted. Americans were leaving Mazatlán. The headlines about cartel violence in Sinaloa had scared people off. Properties that were selling for $200,000 a year ago were sitting unsold at $150,000. The bank started foreclosure proceedings. Both mortgages. I got the notices in November. I had 60 days. I tried to negotiate, tried to explain. They didn't care. By December, I'd lost the first 2 condos. The 3rd one, the one I owned outright, I had to sell at a fire sale price just to pay off the remaining credit card debt and HOA liens. I got $80,000 for it. After paying off everything I owed, I had $11,000 left. 4 years, $340,000. Gone. I couldn't stay in Mazatlán anymore. Every street reminded me of what I'd lost. I saw Sophia once, getting into a car with someone near the marina. She saw me too, looked right at me, kept walking. I spent my last weeks in Mexico, living in a cheap hostel near the bus station, trying to figure out where to go. I couldn't afford a flight back to the States. I couldn't afford an apartment deposit in Denver. I had no plan B. That's how I ended up on that bench with $80 and a bus ticket I couldn't use. A security guard came over and told me I couldn't sleep there. I said I wasn't sleeping, just resting. He said I needed to leave. I asked him where I was supposed to go. He shrugged. I sat there until morning, watching families come and go, trying not to think about how easily everything had fallen apart. I called my sister in Phoenix, hadn't spoken to her in 2 years, told her I needed help. She wired me $500, enough for a bus to Tijuana and then across the border. I stayed in a migrant shelter for 3 nights while I figured out my next move. Finally crossed at San Ysidro on foot. A Border Patrol agent asked me if I was a US citizen. I said yes and showed him my passport. He looked at me for a long time, looked at my clothes, my one suitcase, the exhaustion on my face. He stamped my passport and waved me through. My sister picked me up in San Diego. We drove back to Phoenix in silence. She didn't ask what happened. I didn't offer to explain. She set me up in her spare bedroom, told me I could stay as long as I needed, but I had to find work. I was 58 years old, starting over with nothing. I got a job at Home Depot, stocking shelves, $9 an hour. The first month back, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake doing the math, trying to figure out where I went wrong. The answer was everywhere. I trusted the wrong person. I over-leveraged. I didn't verify. I didn't get proper insurance. I thought being confident meant I knew what I was doing. But confidence and knowledge aren't the same thing. I don't blame Mexico. I've met guys who've done well there, who've built legitimate businesses, who understand how things work. The problem wasn't Mazatlán. The problem was me thinking I could figure it out in 6 months. Thinking a pretty face and a family connection meant I could trust someone. Thinking 3 condos were better than one, without understanding the risk that came with scaling up. The lawyers back in Denver would tell you to diversify. Never put all your money in one place, one country, one strategy. I put everything into 3 condos in one city, in one country, and when it collapsed, I had nothing to fall back on. No safety net, no way out, except begging my sister for a bus ticket. It's been 2 years since I came back. I'm still at Home Depot, still in my sister's spare room. I've saved about $9,000. At this rate, I'll have enough for my own apartment in another year. I'll be 61. I had a plan to retire at 54. Instead, I'll be working until 70, if I'm lucky. If my body holds up, if nothing else goes wrong. People ask me if I'd do it again. The answer is no. Not because Mazatlán was a trap, because I was unprepared. I thought buying property abroad was like buying property in Colorado. It's not. The laws are different. The risks are different. The people you meet have different motivations. And when you're a foreigner with cash, you're not seen as an investor. You're seen as an opportunity. Sophia wasn't evil. Roberto wasn't a monster. They saw someone who wanted something badly enough to ignore the warning signs. Someone who'd rather believe in a dream than ask the hard questions. That was me. I wanted the beach life so badly, I convinced myself the numbers worked when they didn't. I wanted companionship so badly, I convinced myself Sophia cared about me when she cared about what I could provide. The worst part isn't the money. It's knowing I can't trust my own judgment anymore. Every decision I make now, I second guess. Every person I meet, I wonder what they want from me. I'm 60 years old, and I'm learning to trust myself again from scratch. That's harder than starting over financially. That's the part that keeps me up at night. If you're thinking about doing what I did, I'm not going to tell you don't. I'm just going to tell you this. Make sure you understand the laws. Make sure you have reserves. Make sure your insurance actually covers what you think it covers. And make sure the people you trust have earned it with time, not charm. Because charm fades fast when the money runs out. And when you're sitting on a bus station bench with $80 and nowhere to go, charm doesn't buy you a ticket home. I thought I was building a new life. I was dismantling the old one. And the difference between those two things is something you only understand when it's too late to fix it.